So back in code, we got this wrapped paragraph, and I mentioned that Vue would add certain utility classes. Well, it does. So let's define styles for them in the CSS code. You can do this anywhere, I'll do it here. And the default class names Vue will add are v-enter-from, v-enter-active, and v-enter-2. Vue by default will add these three CSS classes at different times, as explained, when the element is first added to the DOM. So in this case, when the paragraph is appearing on the DOM for the first time. Now we can define different class styles here. We can define different properties. And we should include at least one transition or animation so that Vue is able to read the duration time from these classes, because I mentioned that this would be another key thing it does behind the scenes. Now in v-enter-from, you define your starting state. And for this paragraph, that could be that it initially is invisible by setting opacity to 0, and maybe that it's moved up a little bit by setting transform to translate y minus 30 pixels. This moves it up a little bit above its real position. In v-enter-2, we have the end state, so the final state we want to have at the end. And there we can have an opacity of 1 and set transform translate y to 0 to take the real position of the element it should have on the page. And v-enter-active is now the place where you, for example, add the transition CSS property to tell Vue to watch for all CSS properties that might be animated. So in this case, opacity and transform, which are the two properties changing here. Then you define a duration. That is what Vue will read. So what Vue will take to find out how long these classes should be added to the element. And then your easing function. And if you do that and you reload, you can click toggle paragraph and you have this animation for adding the paragraph. For removing, we don't have any yet, but for adding, we do. Well, and I already showed it on the slide. You have similar classes for removing. There we have the v-leave-from class, we have the v-leave-active class, and we have the v-leave-to class. And it's the same concept as for entering. We define our starting state, which for me here is the same state as the end state for entering, but it doesn't have to be the same. You can define a totally different state here, totally different CSS properties as well. That is fine. You don't have to use the same CSS properties as for adding. But here I'm doing it. In v-leave-to, I use the same state as I had for entering in my from state. Now it's the to state for leaving, making this invisible and moving it up a bit. Or actually, let's move it down a bit by setting this to plus 30 pixels, also to emphasize that you don't have to use the same styles as before. And for v-leave-active, I have the same transition setting here, but instead of ease out, I'll use ease in for a different easing function, which just controls how that duration is split across the different steps. And now if you save that and reload, we have an animation for entering and also for removing, like this. Now that is how you can use the transition component to animate the appearance and removal of HTML elements. And especially the removal is something which was harder without transition. But also for entering, you gain more flexibility with that transition component which you wrap around the element, which does use VIF or VShow, and which then should be animated. You don't need it if you're not having this VIF or VShow case, because if you just have something like the block in the first example, in the last lectures, you can just conditionally add and remove CSS classes as you learned it. It's just this added to the DOM or removed to the DOM case where you can't do that because the element is just not there, and that's where transition then helps you.